In this video, we're going to talk about why you should be the toughest critic of your wildlife photography and how you can do that. Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. Happy New Year to you. Perhaps you've already been able to do some wildlife photography this year. I started on January 1st, and for the last 5 or 6 days I've been photographing foxes. Tomorrow I'm moving to a new location to look for wild horses. If you're interested in seeing the photos that I take in the field each day, follow me on Instagram. I usually post once or twice a day. So it's New Year's, and often at this time of year, people are thinking about how they want this year to be better than the last. And if you're thinking about that in terms of your wildlife photography, then this video is for you. We're going to talk about the feedback loop and one of the ways in which you can improve, and that is to become the toughest critic of your own work. So let's get started. Let's start with some context. If you were taking up a musical instrument, you would probably get a teacher from the very beginning, and that teacher would provide you with feedback on your progress. Most people, when they take up photography, don't get a teacher at the beginning. Sometimes they have a teacher or someone who's providing them with feedback when they go on a photography workshop. And I will say that many of the workshops don't turn out really to be workshops. Some people who are really great photographers are really not great teachers, and often on workshops people are really not getting the feedback that they should be getting. But even if they are getting great feedback on workshops, people are not on workshops all the time. Now, for many people, they learn about photography through online resources such as YouTube. The problem with online communities is that they're full of a lot of positive feedback, but there's not a lot of critique. I saw a post recently on a photography forum. Someone had posted images that they had taken of a family of, well, I won't say which species it was, and I've seen many posts like this before. This one was noteworthy because it really was a fantastic opportunity. The problem is that the images had so many basic problems, fundamental problems. The composition was off, the framing was off. They had cropped, parts of the animals, tails and legs and heads and so forth out of the frame, and not in an intentional way. And yet everyone was raving and posting, things saying fantastic photos. But really what they should have been saying is that was a fantastic opportunity, and I really like how you did this, but perhaps you might want to think about doing this and providing some feedback. Now, perhaps the person didn't want any feedback, but it's also possible that the person has never had any feedback and really is quite clueless and doesn't know that there are some real problems with the images that they're taking. In this video, we're going to talk about becoming the toughest critic of your own work. And the reason that you need to be the toughest critic of your own work is that you are the one who is always around, who is making the decisions in the field about what to photograph and how to photograph, and making the decisions in editing about what to keep and what to throw away. Now, you need to be the toughest critic of your own work, but you definitely shouldn't be the only critic of your own work. I look at my stuff all the time and I think it's crap, honestly. Like, I look back at things and I think things are garbage sometimes. And in fact, if I'm not feeling that way, if that is not happening for me with some regularity, then that's a warning sign to me that, that there's something is wrong. But in addition to trying to be very critical of my own work, I always have other people look at things. I even pay other people to look at my things, where we just sit down and all we do is we just walk through a whole bunch of images and talk about them. So it's really important, because we all have our own biases, to have an external viewpoint or multiple external viewpoints providing input into the feedback loop that you need to improve. But the thing that you need in addition to that is for you to be the toughest critic of your own work. And let's talk about now how you can do that. So let's talk about 3 ways that you can become the toughest critic of your own work. In a previous video I made that was called 5 Ways to Make Your Wildlife Photography More Impactful, we talked about a number of different elements such as light, behavior, the scene or the environment, the story, and emotion. Now, you don't have to use those elements as a framework, but it's useful to use some kind of framework where you have some elements that you are looking at as a way to measure and to compare different images. So the first thing is that you really want to try to get more selective with your opportunities. And remember that an opportunity is different to a photo. So remember that story that I mentioned with the post of the images that I thought really needed some work. That was a fantastic opportunity, but the photos that came out of it weren't so fantastic. But it begins, of course, with the opportunities. But in order to try to filter things down and get better, you need to be selective with your opportunities. If you are at a location, if you're with a particular animal at a particular sighting and it's not meeting your needs, if it's failing to provide you with, let's say, at least one of those 5 things, if that's the framework you're going to use, if there is no interesting light, if there's no interesting behavior, if there's no interesting environment, if there's no story that you can tell from the images you're taking, if there's no emotion that you think you could evoke in a viewer, then really what are you there for, right? So think about sometimes cutting your losses and moving on, right? You have limited time in the field sometimes and you have to use it wisely. And so sometimes if you're not getting anything out of a particular location or a particular sighting, perhaps it's time to move on and go and seek another opportunity. So that's the first thing. Now let's just say you get to a fantastic opportunity. The second thing is to be more selective with your shooting. You know how sometimes you take a photo and then immediately after you take the photo you say, I don't know why I took that, I'm just going to delete it. We all do that. Now sometimes it's just because it was a technically hard thing to grab the shot. Let's say it was a bird that was flying past really fast, and it feels good to get that shot. We all do that, but what you don't want is that you're taking lots of shots that or you really should know that you're just going to be deleting those shots anyway. So think about shooting less. Now, by shooting less, we're forced to think more about each shot, or at least each sequence of shots, because I include bursting as, let's say, if you take a burst, and that's one shot. Now, you might just say, okay, it's digital and there's no cost to shooting, but there often is a cost. But before we get to those, let's talk about some valid reasons to shoot a lot. So, for example, let's just say there's a lot of action happening. Obviously, you're going to probably be bursting a lot. It means that you need to capture a lot of specific behaviors or events, or that you perhaps want to just capture lots of different head positions or foot positions or wing positions. Another reason to be shooting a lot is perhaps that let's say you're mitigating risk because you're shooting, let's say the light is really low and you're shooting with a very low shutter speed. So you're going to be bursting a lot just in the hopes that one of those shots is going to be sharp. Another reason that you might be shooting a lot is perhaps you're experimenting with a new technique. You're doing something that you haven't done before, and you have to make multiple attempts to get it right. So those are some reasons that you might want to be shooting a lot. But despite that, let's get back to the cost. The cost of shooting needlessly. When you have your eye up to the viewfinder and you're shooting, you're not as aware of something else that might be going on. There might be something else that's happening, or might be something that is developing and about to happen. Also, when you shoot a lot and you fill up your card with a lot of images, that's a lot of data to deal with, especially now that we have high resolution files. It's a lot of data to have to download, and you might run out of space on your card, and you might have to change cards in the field possibly at a bad time. You have to download that stuff, and then you have to go through it and edit it all. And in fact, many people get overwhelmed with the workflow of editing. There are lots of people I've seen who don't edit their stuff, and in fact sometimes have never edited their stuff because they're overwhelmed by the number of images that they have to go through, so they don't even ever get started on it. And you definitely don't want to end up in that situation. So think about how you can be more selective with your shooting, given that there may be times where it is entirely valid that you do need to shoot, or you do need to burst a lot. And then the third thing is try to be more selective with your editing and your pruning. Cull aggressively. This is really important. Now, force yourself to select only the images that you really want to keep. When you're going through your images, of course, you should immediately delete shots that have poor image quality, or out of focus, or so badly exposed that they're not recoverable. You should delete shots that have very weak composition. Another thing that's a really great exercise is to compare different shots. So if you've got two images that are fairly similar, compare them and try to compare them along different elements, such as the ones that I mentioned from the previous video. Like, let's just say you might say, okay, the light is better in this one, or this one has a more interesting environment. This one, the environment is not so great because there are a bunch of distractions in the background. And force yourself to choose one of those two images. And if you've got 5 images, go through the process and force yourself to choose let's just say one. If I'm talking about where, let's say you've got 5 images that are quite similar. Choose the best one of those 5. It's also important to sort your images and think about the purpose of each shot. So for example, I typically have images that I know are sort of like gold. These are the images that I'm going to print, that I'm going to sell, that I might use as part of my portfolio. There are other images that I have that I call sort of backstory images. These are images that I might share through social media or other channels, just to tell stories about what was going on, perhaps stories that are part of the process that I had to undertake in order to get the gold images. And then I also have some images that are just sort of private memories. These are images that I wouldn't share with anyone else, but I just keep them for my own memory of the event. If you categorize your images in this way, let's say, so you've got your gold images, your backstory images, and your private memory images. Obviously, you want to allocate your editing time accordingly. For the private memories, you just do rough edits on those. Often you can just do, you can either just do an auto edit, or you can do a copy and paste edit where you take all the settings from an image that's similar and just apply them to one of the other images. For your backstory images, you might want to spend a bit more time with these, but you can still edit them pretty quickly. If you're sharing them on social media, you should edit with that in mind. For example, tighter shots work better on social media, as people are often viewing a lot on small devices like phones. Now, obviously, for the gold images, those are the images that you're going to spend the bulk of your time editing. And in fact, there are also images that you'll typically want to revisit multiple times. You might do an initial edit and then come back later on, and then over time you might decide to change things. And I do that all the time, even with images that I've selected for print. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll look at something and I'll say, now looking at this, or now knowing something that I didn't know before, I'm going to change something about that edit. And if you have images that don't fall into any of these categories, if they're not gold, if they're not backstory images, if they're not private memory images, then perhaps you shouldn't be keeping the image. So think about how you can get more aggressive with your culling, and don't become an image hoarder. I've seen people who are really sort of in trouble because they have thousands, not thousands, tens of thousands of images, because they've never deleted anything, and then at some point they realize they really have to start deleting stuff, just because, if for no other reason, just trying to store and manage the storage for all of that, especially if you're putting it in the cloud, becomes problematic. So then they go to start editing, start deleting and culling things, and it's a mammoth task. It's a Herculean task to go back and look at years of images, and try to figure out what needs to be deleted. And I've seen cases where people are doing this for months and months and months on end, trying to catch up, and you don't want to get into that position. So if you start at the beginning and you're aggressive with your editing and with your culling, then you can keep up with it and you get a very efficient workflow in place, and then you just have this set of images that is just what you need for the different purposes. So let's summarize. We've talked about 3 things. The first is being more selective with your opportunities. The second thing is being more selective with your shooting. And the third thing is being more selective with your editing and your pruning. These are all ways in which you can become a tougher critic of your own work. But remember, you don't just want to be the only critic of your own work. It's really important to also have other people provide input into your feedback loop. You should always consider feedback to be a gift, and that doesn't mean that you should take everything and incorporate it. It has to resonate with you, but you need to be open to the feedback. And if you find something that resonates with you, then figure out how you can incorporate that into your improving photography. Also, provide feedback to others. Study other images, and even if you don't know who the photographer is or you're not in contact with the photographer, just by going through the act of looking at something and critiquing it and formulating the critique and the feedback, that can be a really valuable exercise. There are also some channels on YouTube where you'll find that they do videos where they just critique user submissions, and these can be really interesting to watch to see what kind of critique they provide, and then also looking at those images and thinking about your own critique. So master the art of feedback, of both receiving feedback as well as giving feedback. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Happy New Year to you. I hope that 2020 is an awesome year for your wildlife photography and for many other things for you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.